Friends, welcome to this video program on educational communication. This is part of the Masters in Distance Education program, Communication Technology. And we will discuss in this program about communication as such, more particularly educational communication, and how it is applied to or carried forward in the context of distance education, online learning, and how this is also facilitated for people with different abilities or disabled students as such. So as you see on your screen, communication basically is a process. There is a sending end, there is a receiving end, and in between communication process takes place, and there are a lot more constraints in the communication, whether it is a verbal communication or communication through technology, or communication which is non-verbal. And there is always a feedback system in the communication. So as you see, communication is both an art and science. It is an art because it's a creative process that how effectively one communicates, and it's a science that there are certain do's and don'ts that one has to follow for an effective communication. Communication becomes productive once it becomes more effective, in the sense that the communicator and the people who are to be communicated, they are tandem with each other. And there is no understanding between the two, as in the case of mass media and broadcasting. There is no feedback system as such, and therefore communication gets distorted, or the intended outcomes of the communication may not actually take place. So it is both an art and science, and this is a process of transmitting the exchange of information, ideas, thoughts, views, opinions, and always there is an intended outcome, and intention is decided by the communicator, and sometimes the people with whom we communicate, they also form part of the decision making in terms of what the outcome should be. And as you see, the Wilbur Graham, who is supposed to be called as the father of all communication, has and who wrote the book Big Media, Small Media, has given the understanding that communication is a process of informing. There is an information exchange, persuading, that influencing people to persuade, to influence their views, or teaching. In case of teaching and learning, communication is also a teaching learning process. And also, this is entertaining people. And therefore, not surprising that today that educational communication is also called edutainment, in the sense that a technology-enabled communication combines both education as well as entertainment together. In gaming, in many other such contexts, that edutainment has become more effectively than a simple communication process called education or teaching learning. The components involved in communication are three, basically. There is a source, there are receivers, and there is a channel. The source could be textual communication in a self-learning material, for instance, or audio or video, or voice visuals like an audio cassette with a voiceover. And the person who is presenting either through voice or visual and voice put together and is very important, and the nature of the person and the event that is taking place, they all put together decide how the communication has been effective. And the channel of communication could be a living organism like a human being, or a technology. It could be one way, like broadcasting, or two way, like a teleconferencing, video and audio two way. And it could be multi-way, that there can be multi-transmission of the communication from the receiving end to multi-campuses, as for instance, the distributed learning in the American context is being presented by a professor in the classroom. When I was a Fulbright scholar, I was teaching a semester there, I was presenting, and it's a very new kind of experience. And your presentation gets distributed to different multi-campuses where students are sitting, and nobody actually knows which is the actual classroom, and interaction actually takes place. And this is what is called a distributed learning. And there are always receivers. They could be living organisms, or they could be programmed artifacts in terms of technology-enabled learning. And in fact, the technology receives and then, as programmed, decides that how that information could be disseminated, for instance. And as you see, there are 5 functions basically in terms of communication. One, obviously, is information. that the information could be a direct information, as I'm presenting right now, for instance, or it could be a retrieved information in the sense that the information is transmitted, it gets stored, and then somebody retrieves it and then disseminates further. And the information is supposed to be authentic, because technology and human beings, when they interact with each other, and there is an understanding of authenticity. But when technology retransmits, authentically it does that. But if the people in between are involved in interpreting and further facilitating or mentoring or scaffolding that information, then there is a possibility of distortion. But the training of the people involved in technology and about learning would decide how authentic the interpretation by the mentor would be, and therefore the authenticity of information. Second is socialization, that we all communicate every day. People communicate in the community, in group, family, and there is a global communication, and global communication is basically today through technology and technology facilitated communication, including your mobile handset, which combines almost 3 kinds of technological developments: broadcasting, telecommunication, and computing. All the 3 put together is a mobile. And mobile communication, with the help of social technologies and social networks today, decide large-scale communication that is taking place today. It is being told that the verbal communication that is taking place in the community is much less than technological communication, or the communication with the help of technology that is taking place today. In earlier times, decades back, that was not the case, but today that is the case. The third function of communication is motivation. If the communication is positive, it will have a positive impact on the people and individual, as well as development, as well as social welfare. And therefore, information to be communicated has to be properly designed, much more positive way, so that it can have an intended positive impact on the people with whom we are communicating. Obviously, the fourth function that we are discussing is education and educational communication. And that communication takes place with an intention to educate people, formal, non-formal, as well as informal. All the 3 put together could also be called a blended learning today, vis-a-vis the online and face-to-face joining together, both formal, informal, and non-formal way teaching and learning can take place. And that blending would be much flexible, much more acceptable to the people and qualitatively enriched than the simple either face-to-face communication in the classroom or distance or online communication. As I told earlier, that today education and entertainment are joining together to have a much more facilitative, enjoyable communication, teaching, learning process. So therefore, entertainment. Entertainment could be an exclusive entertainment, as you see on your television screens, and otherwise also live streaming and YouTube and so on and so forth. And in education communication, the entertainment will be more related to activity-based teaching and learning, relating to that particular module that one is teaching. So art and culture and edutainment, these are all part of the communication process. So 5 functions of communication: information, socialization, motivation, education, and entertainment. And all the 5, in fact, can be combined in educational communication. What could be the strategies that we adopt to communicate? For instance, that you can look at your own communication when you are communicating with yourself, communicating with others, and communicating through technology to a larger group of people, including presentation of a MOOCs, for instance, massive open online courses which goes to thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. So basically, it is sound and sign. I'm presenting through sound, and I'm visually available to you. And I'm also using some kinds of signs, and which will have much more impact than a very dull communication process. So therefore, living organisms are involved in creating sounds and signs in communicating, generally as well as in education. Second, language is very important, that not only language, English or Hindi or Urdu or Sanskrit or any other language, but also the way one modulates that language. And modulation is very important. Using sign and modulation of language will have greater impact, much more qualitative impact on the receivers. Earlier we had postal, and these days there is a courier system. Almost the postal system is dying down, and especially in COVID time and later on also the postal system is getting abolished gradually, and the courier service is taking place of the postal system, and there are other means of technology enabled communication today. And telecommunication is the telecommunication facility, generally facilitates the technology enabled communication today. So if you recall, I said that there are three technological developments: broadcasting, telecommunication, and computing. And the development of telecommunication technology has led to use of large-scale use of telephone interaction or counseling, as they say, IRC, and also conferencing, teleconferencing, audio-video conferencing, as well as computer conferencing. And of course, traditionally, we had the mass media, which still continue today for communication to the largest number of people, because mass media, in fact, radio and television, like All India Radio, in our case, and FM radios, which are local based, All India Radio and the Doordarshan, in our case, the television channels, they reach to largest number of people, including Gyan Darshan of IGNOU, for instance, which is to be carried out compulsorily by all the service providers in terms of television. So, including Tata, Sky, Airtel, and whatever. So, they all have to communicate through, and this is what is called a mass media. So, television, radio, they have been mass media. Satellites, as I said, the conferencing system is when there is an audio video two-way, for instance, there is a direct, this is called synchronous, because people who watch the satellite communication, they are directly present in there, and this is what is called same place, different place but the same time. This is what is called synchronous communication. And classroom communication is also synchronous, but it is contiguous in the sense that it is the same place and same time. And in a teleconferencing, it's the same time but different places. And finally, the third development of technology, as I said, computing, and the computing system, or the developments of computer technology, which is called computer-based or computer-mediated or computer-enabled or computer-maintained, for instance, which is more related to today to social technologies and social networks, including your Facebook and so on and so forth, and many other such channels which are available for communication. So to conclude this, the different strategies that are available today to us are science and sounds, language, the courier system, the telecommunication, mass media, satellites, and computer. All these. And if you say that where the teacher stands, teacher is with sign and sounds, when there is a presentation by a lecture or seminar or workshop or lab work and so on and so forth. The process of communication, as you see, that it starts from a sender and it reaches through ideas, and then there is an encoding process takes place, and the message gets filtered. If it's a technology enabled or if it is a direct communication, there is a disturbance in between in the ether, in the air, and so on and so forth. If it is a classroom, there are different factors which contribute to disturbance, and in technology enabled learning, there are different factors which contribute to disturbance. Our attempt should be that we should reduce the constraints and the disturbances such that the communication perfectly takes place. And the receiver receives. Of course, there is a channel, and we have already discussed, it could be verbal, it could be through mediated communication through technology, either teleconferencing or computing, facilitating these. And when the receiver receives that, the receiver does a decoding as per one's own previous experience and understanding, and one tries to interpret that information, and everybody, even twins, interpret the information very differently. There may be a lot of commonalities, but there will be a lot of differences insofar as decoding is concerned. And after decoding, one tries to assimilate that, and that is called the understanding. And understanding leads to some kind of tryout that we try out in different occasions, and we find something which is acceptable to us, and we assimilate that, and something which we cannot accept, we will not assimilate that. So that simply means that everything that is being communicated is not actually assimilated by people. It depends on their attitude, their understanding, their perception, and their personality and their worldview. And what is important is the last point, that we must have a feedback system. In technology-enabled learning, there is an immediate feedback system. In a classroom communication also, there is an immediate feedback system. But in teleconferencing, for instance, audio, video, or radio and television communication, especially mass media, feedback system is much delayed. So immediate feedback and delayed feedback, and that feedback has to be very well organized in such that would contribute to further improvement of the communication that is taking place. And communication is not for once. Communication is a cyclical process, and therefore feedback and monitoring are very important instrumentally. So friends, coming down to educational communication, as you see that there is a sender, the teacher, and there is a receiver, the students, and there is a teaching learning resources involved in that. So once we decide the learning outcomes and learning objectives, based on that, we break down the modules into credits and the modular formats, and the teaching learning takes place based on the learning outcomes. And the University Grants Commission regulation on outcome-based learning today and vis-a-vis the choice-based credit system, they facilitate us today to decide that how we proceed with outcome-based learning, decide the teaching learning resources, including teachers' presentation, either face-to-face or through audio or video or conferencing system, or maybe in a virtual class, which is a live class system, which is computer-mediated, internet-based. All kinds of resources. They are basically self-learning resources. They could also include textbooks. They are the second component in the educational communication. Then, of course, there are teachers and learners. They could be face-to-face in a contiguous in the classroom, or they could be at a distance, like distance education, or they could be synchronous and asynchronous in case of online learning that we'll discuss immediately after a few minutes. And there is a time and space. It could be same time, same space, that is classroom, same time, different space, teleconferencing. And time and space is very different in asynchronous communication in online teaching and learning. And of course, there is an assessment system. Assessment rubric is built into that in classroom teaching and learning. It could be assignments, it could be seminars, it could be semester and examination and so on and so forth. In online, it could be continuous every week. There can be an assessment system, for instance. And assessment rubric would include all kinds of assessment strategies that are available to us, both objective type, essay type, sort and set type, and many other such possibilities that are available to teachers and students. And always there is a feedback system. In the classroom, the feedback is immediate. In technology-enabled learning, the feedback could be immediate. And in conferencing and radio and television, there would be a delayed feedback. But all these need to be designed. The point is that all these need to be designed properly based on the learning outcomes and based on the subject and discipline and the concept that the teacher is dealing with or teaching. If you see that in distance education, basically which takes place through a mediated communication because teachers and students are at a distance. This is the theory Professor Michael Moore gave in 1977 and revised it later, which is called a transactional distance. What it simply says in distance education, communication in distance education is that teachers and students are far away from each other, unlike the classroom when they are just contiguous in front of themselves. Whereas in the classroom, the communication by the teacher may not be effective if the students are psychologically not with that communication process. They may be physically present, they they could be psychologically with the teacher, but they may be far away psychologically from the teacher. So therefore, there will be very, very less impact or effectiveness of the communication or lecturing or presentation that the teacher is making. Imagine in a distance education context where the teachers and students are 1,000 miles away from each other, but they are physically away from each other, but they could be psychologically with each other. So the teachers and students could be psychologically together. This is what is called a psychological distance or a transactional distance. How he interpreted that distance education could be defined in terms of 3 variables, as you see on your screen. One is structure, second dialogue, and third is autonomy or the student or learner autonomy or independence. What does it simply mean? He simply says that even twins learn very differently. So therefore, if we make our teaching learning, including teaching learning resources and teaching learning processes and teaching learning activities, more linear for everybody, one system or one test for everybody, one activity for everybody or for all, it works more or less not so effectively, I should say. So what he says is that if we reduce structure, That simply means if we can provide multiple pathways for the students to proceed for the same learning outcome, same learning objective, if we could perceive in a very systematic way, in a multi-perspectives, if we provide multiple pathways for this is what is called open learning. Open education is to remove constraints as much as possible to get into the educational system. Open learning would simply mean that facilitation should be made, that each individual student would proceed as per one's own ability and space. So therefore, if we reduce structure and simultaneously increase dialogue in the self-learning materials itself, if they are conversational, they are interactive, then certainly dialogue increases. Dialogue in terms of study center interaction, this is what we call counseling instead of lecturing. So reduce structure, increase dialogue, that will facilitate students have more independence and autonomy, and therefore transactional distance will be reduced if there is less structure, more dialogue, and there is a greater learner autonomy. Transactional distance will be reduced, and therefore in distance education, attempts should be made to reduce transactional distance, even if physical distance is greater, much more than what happens within the classroom. If we look at that, communication in distance education could be, this is what David Stewart and Professor Bore Holmberg more specifically talked about, real communication and simulated communication. These two we have to consider, and we do consider while designing distance education resources and teaching learning strategies, including assessment and so on and so forth. In real communication, there is a direct lecturing in the or counseling at the study center or learning support center, counseling at the learning support center. There are lab practicals. There is a synchronous communication, asynchronous communication. We will see that immediately after a minute. Synchronous and asynchronous, they are all real communication. Communication which is actually taking place face-to-face or at a distance, whereby there is a synchronous or asynchronous linkage between the teachers and students. Think of the other strategy called simulated communication. The self-learning materials, what the teacher is built into the system is called simulator, that the teacher is teaching already through the self-learning material before the students actually access those materials. So the teacher is built into the material. So the teacher is actually teaching. So development of self-learning material is basically more dialogic, more conversational, more interactive, and there are in-text questions, self-assessment questions, examples, activities which can be brought in. And in fact, audio and video could also be combined with self-learning materials today, because they are now technology-based self-learning materials. There are assignments. Basically, assignment is a teaching learning process, teaching learning tool, where the commenting and grading takes place, that the teacher provides both margin comments as well as overall global comments, which is much more teaching the students. So assignment is a simulated communication. Audio and video programs, before the students see audio and video programs, the teacher has already presented. So therefore, audio and video programs could also be called simulated. So therefore, real communication and simulated communication, they are essential to design in distance education. Look at online learning. Basically, online teaching learning in a learning management system on the platform, proprietary like a WebCity on Blackboard, or an open source excellent platform like a Moodle, for instance, or for that matter in SWAYAM platform also, the national platform of SWAYAM also, it takes place both synchronous as well as asynchronous. Synchronous would be same time but maybe different places. It could be same time, same place. It could be same time, different places. So through telephone, practical hands-on, virtual class, for instance, with the help of technologies every week or every day or every fortnight, virtual lab, teleconferencing, interactive radio, charts like Google Charts, for instance, or Yahoo Charts, and internship, all put together, they will be synchronous. Synchronous could be same place, same time, or it could be same time but different places. Asynchronous communication, like for instance, that I'm sending an email to you, you are taking your time to think it over and taking time to respond to me. And similar is the case of blogging, for instance. I create a blog, which is my individual reflection. People take time to react to that. I respond to that. Wiki is a collaborative platform. We all join together to contribute to development of resources or activities or projects or assignments and so on and so forth. Email discussion forum is an instrumentality within teaching and learning of online learning, which is asynchronous and which contributes to more reflective learning. And therefore, discussion forums, I would submit, that should be made more activity-based and more reflective. So reflective discussion forum, depending on the reflective task and the reflective communication and interaction between students and teachers and among students, for instance, would contribute to that. So project-based learning, for instance, SMS surveys, these are all contributing to what is called communication, both synchronous and asynchronous in online teaching and learning. So finally, friends, that the people with different abilities or people with disabilities, they have different kinds of software and instrumentalities available to effectively engage with the communication process, whether within the classroom or at a distance or online learning or in blended learning context. So it could be visual, there are screen readers, speech recognition software, speech synthesizers, the Braille books, they're also available for those who are visually impaired. Those who are hearing impaired, they always use hearing aids. But what the research says is that experience tells us that those who are hearing impaired and who can see everything, they are the best programmers, they can handle the computer the best. So they are the best people who could, they could be equally competent and the people who can see and hear, but sometimes, at times, they also become more effective than the normal people insofar as computer programming is concerned. And there is a learning disability, cognitive disorder, there are speech synthesizers, reading tools, learning disability programs or packages, they are available. So people with different abilities or disabilities, they also could effectively engage these days, and technology is facilitating that. So friends, thank you very much. We have come to the conclusion of the program. We discussed about communication, education communication, communication in distance education, communication strategies in online learning, and different kinds of tools that are, and software that are available for people with different abilities or disabilities to effectively engage with the communication process. Hope you enjoy this program. Thank you very much.